Alright, so I have a little wall hanging here that I'm going to put binding on, and I have a machine here that's set up with the binding attachment. It has a guide that folds the binding how it needs to be, and then a special foot that matches up with the attachment. The binding I'm using comes on a roll, comes in 2 inches wide, cut on the bias, and it's a little bit starched. You don't have to use tape that's on the roll, you can make your own, but you do need to cut it 2 inches wide and make diagonal seams in it. So I just pick my starting point and push the wall hanging inside here, and I'll backstitch only 1 or 2 stitches, just enough to anchor it. And then I'm going to go all the way to the end of the corner. Then to make your miter, you stitch all the way to the very edge of the quilt, and I'll backstitch 1 or 2 stitches. Then pull out a little bit, and then I'm going to fuss with it to get that miter folded in the way I want it. And then I just pinch it and hold it in place. I'm not going to go all the way back there and stitch. I'll come back and do that stitching at the end, and then I'll continue stitching. So this binding attachment lines everything up so that when you sew from front to back, your stitching is in the exact right spot, close to the edge on the front and the back. So I'll continue stitching all the way around, and I'll still do this miter setup on every corner. So still the same thing. I'll just fuss with this till I get it folded where I'm happy with it, but don't actually stitch it until a little bit later. Alright, so I'm coming up to the place where I started. There's a couple different ways that you can do these. You could stop stitching here and then figure out where your seam needs to be and do an actual seam across here. But another way to do it is to cut it off where your stitching started before. Just cut it straight across, and then come up to that point. So I stitch all the way back to this point here, and then I'll just anchor it, and I'll release a little bit more binding out. And if you finger press it as it comes out of this attachment, things will be pressed where they need to be and line up pretty good. But then I'm going to cut it off, and then I'll tuck the ends under and finish it off like that. But if I go back to these miters, I turn it over and cut my threads that I left here from before. And then I'll line this up until I get it where I like it. And it does make a nice little miter there on the front and the back. And then I'll go right back into this machine, pull out the binding, and then I can use this binding attachment to help hold this in place where it needs to be. So I'll come back where I want to start stitching. Back stitch a little bit, and then stitch until I get to that mitered fold, and back stitch again. And then you can see that it makes a pretty nice little miter there, front and back. And then I do that on all four sides and finish off the end here, and then I'm done.